As we take a deep dive this season into relationships, complex trauma, complex trauma as an attachment wound, it seems absolutely necessary to visit the topic of relationship to our body, relationship to ourself. And this is a topic that you and I love to explore. And it's really how we got started on this path of healing was our disordered relationship with food and with our bodies. And so I'm happy to jump into this conversation today and hopefully take it to a pretty deep level for folks to look at. The next cohort of neurosomatic intelligence is enrolling now. If you're a coach, a therapist, or a healer, and you want to bring these tools and this framework into the good work that you're doing to create bigger, deeper, more lasting change for your clients and to help your own nervous system prevent burnout, have greater capacity, and be able to expand your life in many different directions, then I would love to talk with you about the program. We are taking discovery calls now. You can book that at neurosomaticintelligence.com. Welcome, everyone, to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. My name is Elisabeth Christoph. I'm the founder of Brain-Based Wellness, an online platform that teaches you to train your nervous system for resilience and behavior change.
And I'm your co-host, Jennifer Wallace, a neurosomatic psychedelic preparation and integration guide, bridging the powerful modalities of neurosomatic intelligence and plant healing medicine spaces. And I don't think there's any way we could avoid this being a big conversation. I think that this is the most sacred relationship that we can enter into, and having a relationship to the body is a cornerstone element to embodiment, to presence. And based on everything that we talk about, having an adverse relationship to the body is actually quite dangerous. It impacts the way we speak to ourselves, limiting beliefs, food patterns, like you said. It was those unhealed food patterns that really brought me into this deeper work, because it gave me so much compassion, and like a weight was lifted from me when I learned that binge eating was a protective survival output. And it just, when I heard those words, it just like this giant puzzle of my life all came together, and I could see how I survived through food, but also in that relationship, either to food in the binge eating way of either that thread or through the diet culture thread. Both were very, very dangerous, and both kept me more disconnected from my body. And it really kept me in an abusive relationship in the way that I spoke to and believed about my body. So healing it and being in a different place now is a really new experience, and it's awesome.
I think, even if people don't consider themselves having disordered eating or like an abusive relationship to their body, there's so many ways that we are disconnected from our body or unable to hear its internal signals. And I think sometimes people can hear this and not think it's a very important component of healing and of personal development and personal growth. But you and I know, and we see so many clients that come in that are really high performing individuals, really doing big things in the world, but underneath it is this still really dysfunctional relationship to their own body. And it robs them of so much of their ability, like you were talking about, to be embodied, to be present, to do the deep work of healing, because they can connect to the body and process those things through. And also just takes a lot of the joy out of life, like the success that they're building, they don't get to experience because there's these deep loops of body shame and body dysmorphia and abuse to their body through diet culture and overtraining. And I was just speaking with one of my friends and clients the other day, and they were going to meet some coworkers that they hadn't seen in a long time, that they had good, deep relationships with, and really wanted to enjoy that meeting. But the message to me was, all I can think about as I'm getting ready is how much weight I've gained and that what they're going to be thinking about me in this moment. And this is like a super successful person that's doing great things in the world that everybody loves. And now in these other relationships is like, you can't show up and be present and have the experience of connecting with other people because you're stuck in the body loop.
Oh, that's so relatable. I mean, the closet meltdowns that I've had over the course of my life trying to fit into where I'm going into, whether that's the professional meeting, something with Pilates based, or wherever I was practicing movement as a teacher, either here on the podcast at Barton Springs, like it was constantly having to calm that voice. And it got really, I mean, I had so many limiting beliefs based on my value in the clothes size that I wore, or if this role showed up in this way, I had to sit perfectly to make sure that my posture was in a certain way so I could suck my gut in a certain way depending on what I'm wearing, and I would really posture myself in the room in a way that made me feel the most comfortable in my body, and it would be all that I could think about. All that I could think about was all that. I mean, it diminished the value. It buried me in unworthiness because I couldn't see through that fogged lens. So that client, I think that lady that you just spoke of is very relatable for people.
Yeah, I think so many people have this going on. And I want us today to like take a deep dive into, there's so many components of this. There's a physical component about regulation and safety, there's an emotional component, there's a belief component, and really look from a neurosomatic perspective about where all of this comes from, how it lives in our body and our nervous system. And so I want to start by really thinking about this idea that our perception of our own body, it depends on the integration of our body signals from outside of us, our exteroception, right? We talk about that a lot, taking in sensory inputs from our eyes, from our skin, from our balance system in our inner ear, and the signals that we experience inside our interoception, the felt sense inside of the body. And both of these systems contribute to our body image. That's the picture we have in our mind's eye about the size, the shape, the form of our bodies, and our feelings concerning those characteristics, right? And so body image is really this multidimensional physical and psychological experience of embodiment. It's all the things that we talk about when we're talking about embodiment, especially in the physical appearance, our awareness of our body and our emotions and sensations that relate to it. And this includes our feelings around our self perceptions, our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs and attitudes towards our body. And so we talk a lot in here about creating safety internally so that we can experience safe relationships and be a safe space for ourselves to process emotions, and also a safe space for other people to co-regulate with. And all of this can be really difficult if we have these big deficits in our input systems, these problems with our interoception, and because of that have a very disorganized, sometimes abusive relationship with our bodies. So from a neurosomatic perspective, so many things affect the relationship to the body: visual deficits, complex trauma, dissociation, interoceptive deficits, societal structures, diet culture, body hierarchy. I mean, there's so much. So there's a lot to dive into today. And all this impacts our health and our relationship with others.
When I hear you talk about interoception, I wonder too, could I have detected that I had a tumor in my body if I had more accurate interoception, if I could feel into my body more? Could anybody do that? Create new that kind of deep relationship with the body. And so I think interoceptive ability is really important, and as we're going to get into, it is going to play a role into the sensory mismatch that we're going to talk about when we talk about body dysmorphia. And the limiting beliefs are just so important because back to that voice that comes in. I mean, is that the sneaky voice of the harsh inner critic, or is that a loving, pillow talking voice that is really kind and supportive to you throughout the day? This really matters. It really matters because it has an emotional tag to it. And that emotional tag, that belief tag, that whole neuro tag, that chunk, it gets all pulled up together. We can't avoid the limiting belief without the unwanting behavior and with the emotional component that comes to it. And so having a punishing or adverse relationship with your body, it is going to come with a lot of toxic and chronic stress that you don't really want to turn away from your body.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to know all of that and to understand I am creating dysregulation and internalizing a lot of stress by not being able to connect to my body and to still have it be really hard. I think it's hard for a number of reasons for people to be able to really have like a level of intimacy with their own body and to feel those feelings. Because in addition to all the parts of our society that disconnect us from our body, like diet culture and, the myriad of ways we're taught to separate our cognitive mind from our body, also all of our somatic memories live in our body. This is where we experience the physiological part of a trigger when we get re-triggered. And that can be really challenging to stay connected in the body. There are many reasons people would want to leave or harm or punish their body, because there's a lot of big stuff in there that the cognitive mind has been repressing for a long time because it's overwhelming and it's big. And the body is often where we face the outcomes of our trauma, right? Like our mind can repress it and cognitively we can shove it down and not have to experience it and come to the surface. But in our body, it can express as disease or pain or discomfort. And so we have to face sometimes the consequences of stress and trauma in our body. And that can lead us to a real adversarial relationship with our body because it carries those consequences. And also too, I think we had a conversation with Luis Mojica and we talked about capacity. And I think a lot of times we want a different capacity than we really have. And our body tells the truth about that capacity. So a lot of times our body has been holding so much and experiencing these years of stress and dysregulation that maybe we weren't cognitively aware of. And we want our capacity to be different, to handle different levels of stress and performance in our life. But it can feel like our body is holding us back because that capacity of the body doesn't really measure what our expectations are. And so this can lead to a really fractured, kind of punishing relationship with the body.
When the cognitive narrative and the body are not in sync and they are not speaking together and they are not communicating together, this is not a good relationship. We need for the capacity to grow, to experience this, whatever we're experiencing in our bodies, and to know that what we're experiencing is truth. Like one of the things that you just talked about was, the somatic memories living in the body. And because those memories are often so rooted in shame and fear and anger and death, what feels like I'm going to die every day and complex trauma. And then it's like you wouldn't have that out in your flower vase every day. You'd hide it. You'd put it in the garage. You'd shove it into a corner if that was something that you could tangibly pick up. Like we're not talking about high vibrational, beautiful things. We're talking about hard emotions in the body. And we're talking about emotions that create a lot of inflammation and a lot of gut dysfunction, a lot of bad feelings in the body, feelings of unwellness in the body. When we talk about these emotions being dangerous in the body, we are talking about gut function. We're talking about autoimmune. We're talking about cancer. We're talking about some really big chronic illnesses. And even little ones that maybe even if you view eczema on the spectrum of something a little bit smaller there before it moves into something a little bit bigger. But when we can start to communicate with the body a little bit kinder, because when we've had this massive disconnect, you need to start kind of understanding your truths a little bit more, right? Like so much of regulation allows for the capacity of you knowing of your truths and that them being okay, them starting to get a little bit more neutralized in their emotional ping. But when you have something where you're so disconnected and now you want to form this relationship to the body, you have to start getting a little bit kinder, a little bit more gentle. And it's an experience where, like you were talking about, this disconnect between cognitive and somatic. When we I think these two start to bring and bridge themselves together, it's almost this very hot cold where presence and embodiment feel very infantry in a way, like just baby, like I'm here and oh shit, this is big. I'm here in the body now. And it's a sort of touch go. You're sort of in and out. And then all of a sudden, boom, one day you're in and things are harmonized much, much better.
Yeah. It's a process, It's interesting that you brought up eczema because I have this patch of eczema kind of underneath my right arm, in my right armpit and down the side of my body. And it started during a period of incredible stress for me, like really, really high stress period of my life that came. I have not been able to get it to fully resolve and go away. And I used to like carry a lot of shame around it. It was like just one of those things that you don't want people to see. You want to cover it up. And now, like, I just use it as a signal from my body. I'm just monitoring it to see, like, is my nervous system getting better or worse? Is my inflammation going down? And I'm just kind of like inquisitive with it. Like, I'll be like, hey, what do you need? How you doing? And someone actually, several people have been like, you could just put steroid cream on that, but I don't want to. I want to know if my body's and my nervous system is actually getting better. And I want to let that be a way that my body communicates with me about if my neuro practices are really moving me forward in a positive direction. It's just an output.
Hell yeah. That's awesome. It's a beautiful way.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful way to look at your output and the way that your body speaks to you. Because that's the thing, our bodies are speaking to us and we are not listening.
Yeah.
It's normal to have anxiety. It is normal to get a rash if you're under too much stress. Like there's so much that is not normalized about the way that our body speaks to us that we're supposed to put band-aids on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then just keep blocking out those signals.
I think the thing that I see clients struggle with the most is their weight, the way their body is shaped by their extra weight that they carry. And it's hard to touch that part of the body. Sometimes we'll do some stuff with vagus nerve and we have to vibrate on the tummy, or we do some things. And it changed the way I use cues, because there's certain words that I think are really triggering for people, like to use the word tummy, to use the word belly. Like I think
It's loaded.
it's loaded. It's a really loaded story. And so I think that's one of the hardest things about the relationship to the body and about cultivating the presence and embodiment. As practitioners, we know that these narratives are very layered, and we want to support people coming into their bodies safely, feeling their emotions safely, and supporting emotional processing that could be holding them back from being present, connected in relationships, and having the capacity to experience the good stuff in life, like joy and pleasure. The next round of NSI is enrolling now at neurosomaticintelligence.com.
It's amazing how, like, you can be in this really evolved place, and the people that we work with are really smart and like emotionally intelligent and very progressive, including me, including everyone. We can all get stuck in these deep loops about body size, and that pattern runs crazy deep.
Back to the binging and the protective output, there were parts of my body that I would, and I know I've listened to clients say this too, like there were parts of my body that I would hold on to and curse. I would be so abusive to that part of my body. That language inside of me is not going to get me where I want to be in my body.
No. Yeah, I think underneath a lot of everything else that people are looking at and trying to grow and develop with, there's this relationship and the difficulty of this relationship. And recently in our Facebook group, someone asked a question relating to body image and body dysmorphia that I thought was really, really good question. They were asking if you could be dissociated and also hypercritical of your body at the same time. And they just couldn't see how those two could link up, because they're like, if I'm detached from my body, I can't feel my body. How come I'm also hypercritical of it and have all this, hypervigilance and perfectionism around it? And the answer from my perspective is like a resounding yes. You can absolutely have both at the same time. You can have dissociation and the interoceptive deficits that come of that, and that can lead to actually more objectification of your body, right? Because when we are living under high stress, and dissociation is a well-worn protective output. It's something that our body and our nervous system go to frequently. And we know that like what we do, we get better at. So that becomes a protective strategy when body sensations are overwhelming. And the more we dissociate, the less those pathways of being able to relay signals from our body to our brain get fuel, get activation. And so they atrophy. If we don't use it, we lose it. And so interoception and exteroception as well for body signals both have a huge impact on our ability to connect to our body. And then when we don't have that ability, we're more likely to objectify our own body, to be removed from it. And so studies have shown, there was a recent study in 2013 that showed that the degree to which individuals are aware of their inner body signals was inversely correlated with self-objectification, meaning like the more you could connect to your own body, the less you objectified yourself and the less you had a tendency to experience your body as an object. And the more we see our body as an object, the more likely we are to have that abusive relationship with the body, trying to make it fit into a certain form. So with these studies, when they had 2 samples of healthy participants, results showed that lower interoceptive accuracy, like using people measuring their heartbeats perception, was associated with higher body dissatisfaction and like harsher critique of the body and more objectification. So definitely the more dissociation we have, the more likely we can be in that objectified relationship with our body.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I definitely think that both can be existing at the same time. That was me existing at the same time for so long, dissociated and very hypercritical of my body. And people who struggle with body dysmorphia also struggle with visual deficits. A number of visual processing abnormalities are present in body dysmorphia. That could include facial recognition, emotional identification, aesthetics, and object recognition. So, a few minutes ago, we were talking about sensory mismatch and the interoceptive system. So, sensory mismatch, it's when the brain is receiving different information from 2 systems of the brain that it needs to trust for our survival. And so, basically, in a nutshell, it chooses, well, I'm going to let you explain sensory mismatch. So, when we have sensory mismatch in the paradigm of body dysmorphia, we're talking about mismatch being communicated between the visual system and the interoceptive system. They are not integrating and they're saying 2 different things. And the way that the brain works is we don't see what's really there in front of us, but we see what our brain projects. Our brain projects into our awareness what we think we should see, not what's actually there. And so when I think about this visual deficit and body dysmorphia in my own story, I have known for some time that I had a lazy left eye. It's called atropia. And I would situate myself in pictures all the time so that it wouldn't be as noticeable. And I would actively say inside, okay, open your left eye, smile big with your left eye. And it wasn't as noticeable to people. But then, of course, NSI comes along. And then I began to understand that this was a deficit. I could train it because it was also resulting in so much of my dysregulation by going into my deficit. It was going into my threat bucket every day. And so, like all paths, it just got more well worn. And in times of heavy stress, you will see that eye sort of kick off and want to do its own thing. But all that to say, and we can talk about the visual training that we do that goes along with healing our left eye deficit. I know you have the same thing, but this all affects the way I perceive myself to look. It's my perception. And so healing this deficit or working to heal this deficit is a really big deal for me. It's a big deal. It's a big goal. And I feel like I feel its impacts in me in the way that I respond to things. We recently posted a reel of us paddling down on one of the rivers. And I didn't even think twice about being in a bathing suit in social media. Like that is a whole new version of me that never existed until last week. And so I know that the training that I'm doing is really make a difference in the way that I'm living my life. And I heard you say one time that you used to always look around for your body when you would be in public. And I mean, I really related to that too, because I used to always look for it. Like, do I look like that? Do I look like that? Do I look like that girl? Or was very recently, probably within the past couple of years or so, and I've spoken on here many times about how I came to terms with my body at like Barton Springs and how being in swimming places in a bathing suit was also a new experience for me a couple of years ago. That I hadn't done that for decades. And it was that voice about my own body, it started to quiet down. And so did the voices about other people's bodies. And then my own body, as a result, got to be more free in the world.
Yeah.
And so training with intention, it really shifts your projections.
Yeah, there's a couple really important things that I just want to highlight that you talked about. And first, definitely, I did that all the time. I would walk around and think, does that person's body look like mine? Do my legs look like that? Does this look like that? Because I just couldn't get a clear picture of my body. Right. And that's also, that comes from so much dissociation and disconnection from the body. I can't feel it, but also my proprioceptive map, my body mapping abilities of knowing where my body is in space. There's another deficit there that needs to be rehabilitated. And you mentioned that like our visual system isn't actually what's there, it's a projection. And I think that's super, super important for people to take just a pause and think about for a second, because what we're seeing is a brain's projection, not the real data of what's out there. Like, for example, our eyes are always making little micro movements. They're always shifting around all the time. And so if we were really seeing what was coming in directly through the eyes, the world would appear shaky, but we don't, because our brain takes that information in and it kind of puts it all together in this 15 previous second picture of what's going on around us that's stable. And that information, just like every other sensory information that's taken in through the world, is filtered. It's filtered through our beliefs, our perceptions, what data our brain thinks is important to make it up to our cognitive awareness. And so when we look at our body in the mirror, we're really seeing a projection of what our brain thinks we should see, not what is really there. And so in that way, like our beliefs and our deficits and our sensory mismatch, it really creates an entirely new experience of reality when we look in the mirror. And that's so, so important. And then sensory mismatch and just understanding how threatening that is to our nervous system. And just like you were saying, it's when different input systems that our brain relies on to give us information about the world around us and ourselves doesn't match. So my eyes are telling my brain that reality is one way. My ears, the balance system in my inner ears are saying reality is a different way. My body map is saying your body's this way in space, and it doesn't match up to create a clear, cohesive, accurate picture. Remember that our brains function on pattern recognition and prediction, and then they generate an output that's trying to keep us alive. And when that information coming in doesn't match up, our brain has to decide which one of these systems do I want to listen to make that prediction. And making that decision every single second is actually incredibly energy costly to our brain. And so it really drives up the level of threat that our nervous system is under, because our brain's always having to be like, which one is right? Which one is right? And the stakes are high. It's survival is the reason that we're trying to generate that prediction. And so when our visual deficits don't match up with our interoceptive system, it's really creating a high threat load. And if our brain decides to go with the visual information, it's another reason why we might dampen those signals coming from in our body, because our brain doesn't want all that conflicting information coming in.
So then it decides that another system just kind of falls down the hierarchy. And then in that, it gets better at what it does. And so it just gets better at not paying attention or relying on that system.
Yep. And, when we talk about, we have many episodes where we talk about relationship to the body and food and disordered eating. And we always talk about the nervous system, the brain, the body is using food and our behaviors for regulation, right? To create safety and to regulate the nervous system, for emotional regulation, or perhaps repressing or suppressing big emotions that we don't feel we have the capacity to deal with, and our beliefs are the neurotags of beliefs that are in there driving our behavior. And all three of these things have a component in our interoceptive system, right? Because we have a part of our interoceptive system. We've talked a lot this season about the insular cortex. So there's a part in the back part of the interoceptive system where we integrate all of our sensory information that's coming in, and we answer that question, am I safe or unsafe? So our interoceptive system integrates our sensory information and then produces a response. And that's going to directly impact if we are dysregulated or if we're regulated. And then also in our insular cortex, in the middle part of our insula, that has a lot to do with our emotional experience. And it connects to our anterior cingulate cortex, which we also talked about in here, which contains our beliefs about ourselves. And it connects also to our limbic system. And that's what allows us to experience our emotions in our body, right? Like our insular cortex and our hypothalamus work together to make feelings felt. They turn emotions into physical sensations. And so that's a lot of the reasons why this can drive our emotional relationship to sensations. And then that creates behaviors like overtraining or maladaptive food behaviors or dissociation from the body. And then there's another part of the interoceptive system that connects to our prefrontal cortex, where our beliefs about ourselves live and where all of our choices are made. And so there's a huge component of our beliefs about ourselves and our decision making that's driven by our interoceptive inputs as well. And so if you're having interoceptive issues, it's hard to find safety in any of these areas: regulation, emotions, or beliefs.
And as it goes for food, your interoceptive system is what tells you that you're full or that you're hungry. And there's so much about our society or maybe about our family growing up. Like, it's interesting when I think about binging. I believe it's part survival, definitely, but it's also part learned because my mom was a binge eater as well, particularly in my very small years growing up. And when she really taught me how to binge. And so much then I would see her go training super hard. She would binge, and then the next day she'd be Jane Fonda. She'd be out there doing her thing. And I got that same pattern. I would binge and then I would train so hard. It was like moving my body was punishment, not a celebration of how strong I am or how easily I move or the ways in which I can move my body. It became movement was punishment for how I punished my body with food. And I think too, there's that which, disrupts the connection to the body. And then like the whole diet culture thing, we're really talking about a billions of dollars industrial complex, an oppressive system dedicated, billions of dollars dedicated to keep you away from your body. It tells you where to eat, when to eat, what to eat, how much to eat, count this, count that. And I'm not saying that some of those tools are not effective, but there needs to be a balance in how much you also know and trust your body to speak to you, to know, like, you know what? When I eat this, that's not good for me. I feel the inflammation happen in my body when I eat this. So there's also this balance of like, first, you need to you want to come into the body and start learning about it and learning to hear those signals, first of all, to trust those signals. Like we're saying, train them, train the communication of the body, train the brain and nervous system so that you are getting more accurate information. Then start carving out some of those beliefs, start excavating some of that. Why am I speaking to myself like this? What is this behavior all about? Why am I finding myself in the fridge or in the pantry or in huge times of deficits, caloric deficits, and starvation? Like, what is happening here? Am I intentionally like, what is it? What's so big right now? Like the keto thing and the, what do you call that when you don't eat for a while? Like the,
Intermittent fasting.
oh my God, intermittent fasting, right? Like there's nothing wrong with these things if you are doing it safely in a body that you are syncing with, vibing with. It's really important. And then the emotional component that you talk about, the emotional component is huge because the emotions, just like the well-worn pathway of fight or whatever, if the well-worn pathway is fight, I speak for myself, then there's a well-worn pathway for repressed anger.
Yeah.
So it keeps you the emotions will keep you in the cycles of emotional abuse with your body, right? Not just like physical abuse when you're like binging or starving. And then you have the emotional abuse layer of how you are
Yeah.
into your body.
Totally. So, one of the important things I think that you were talking about was how movement becomes linked with punishment. And when I think about that from a nervous system and a brain health perspective, like our brain's first job is our survival and its second job is for movement. And we are made to move. And the quality of our movement and the ability to move in so many ways, right? Like move for emotional expression, move with quality movement as we walk through the world. Our patterns, are we bracing? Are we moving fluidly? Like all of this is so important to our health. And if movement gets so inextricably linked with punishment and harm to our nervous system and our body, that can be really damaging for living a life that is aligned with nervous system health. To have movement as be an expression of emotion and also something that we are built to do and to enjoy. And so I think that that can have a huge impact on people. And then also, too, the emotional abuse that you were talking about with emotional repression. This is so very layered because one, there's damage being done to our body and our nervous system just when we're not allowing that emotional energy to move through, right? Like full stop. When I'm holding in all of these big emotions, that is damaging to my tissue, to my immune system, to my nervous system. And then also too, with emotional repression or suppression, that always comes to with the maladaptive behaviors that we have to use in order to keep those emotions suppressed. So it leads us to, for you and me, it often looked like binging. For a lot of people, it looks like substance or social media scrolling, or maybe overtraining as a distraction from feeling those emotions and being able to sit with them and move them through. And so when we lose our ability to connect to our body and then to be able to safely express and move emotional energy through, that leads to more harm to the body and then to behaviors that also harm the body and further disconnect us from ourselves.
And then we have the driving perfectionism around our bodies and the hypervigilance that happens mostly around people. I was saying in the beginning about the way that my clothes would fit and how I would position myself in rooms and at tables and around people. And God, it would be constant. And if I was wearing one of those body shapers, I'd be so worried about like constantly, is that little bit of fat poking up outside of my back, or is the leg shaper doing something funny? And so that that drove me away from the presence of the people I was with. Sometimes those were really important, not important, but like they were engagements with family that I'll never be able to return back to necessarily because I was dissociated and in high driving perfectionism and hypervigilance around my body, which you can never meet. I could never meet the expectation of what I walked into my closet for and how I was going to walk out of that closet. Like these two pictures, feelings never matched each other. And that was hard.
I feel like decades of my life were spent in obsessive perfectionism about my body that led to very abusive relationship with overtraining, like you said, using it as punishment for binge eating episodes. And then really this season is all about relationships and talking about how we need those social connections. And we have explored how presence is an important part of actually being able to get the healing benefits of social connection or any healing benefits. Like we have to be present to experience the impacts of what that does for our nervous system and for our health. And so in this way, like when we're stuck in these loops of hypervigilance and perfectionism, we're never really present to experience the social connection, the co-regulation, the community that we need for our nervous system to be healthy and process stress and to have that social support that is so important. And really just so many years of my life where every event that I went to, everything that I did, I was really detached from being in the present reality and connecting with people because my mind was entirely focused on my body.
It's a really new experience to feel good in my body. Even, I mean, this is interesting. I don't know always each day how I'm going to perceive my body when I wake up. A lot of what I experience in my body is inflammation I notice that now just from some gut health and some metabolic stuff that has been impeded by stress and trauma, right? Like not cycling through the F's properly. And when we're in an F response, you don't need your digestive system. Well, I was in a chronic state of F survival. And now I'm trying to kind of get things moving back to the interoceptive system and the gut and a healthy vagus nerve. And so, although I don't necessarily understand my perception of my body each day, I show up for it and I meet it and greet it with loving kindness and know that, like, I'm here to meet you where you are each day. And it changes. It really changes each day. And as I come into my body, as I am an embodied human and spirit now, I understand what I like to eat. I understand what I do not like to eat. I understand the way that my body likes to move. And I don't do it for punishment. I do it for joy. I do it because I want to. And it's so liberating. It's so liberating to know that that reel is out there and I don't give a fuck about it.
Amen. Yeah, it really is. And like, how we are anywhere is how we are everywhere, right? So if I can start to liberate myself in my relationship to myself and my body, that really does translate and carry through into so many other areas of my life. You know, my ability to set boundaries with other people, my ability to show up as my full self in other relationships. There's just so much work with shame when we start to really deconstruct all of this. And, you know, as you and I both, we have some consequences of trauma. And, you know, you're a cancer survivor, I have autoimmune, and we know how important this relationship with the body is. And it's still been a journey to get there. It really has. It's still been really a journey for me to get there. And, but I will say it's completely possible. It took beginning with healing my deficits so that my nervous system had the capacity to begin to deconstruct all these old patterns, behaviors, beliefs, and then continuing to gradually allow myself in minimum effective dose to take new actions, to speak to myself differently, to practice, you know, sensory stimulus with my body and body mapping and spending time with my body. And it looks really different today. It looks really different today, my relationship to myself. And it shows up everywhere.
And I don't believe the relationship to the body has an end point. This is the body. You are going to be in relationship with it and it is going to change. Your body is going to change. The way you move with it is going to change. And so also allowing for that to happen, right? Like the body is much different in your 20s than it is in your 40s. And there's so many limiting societal myths out there about the way we age and that, oh, you just lose your vision. Or, oh, it's just natural that that would happen. No, that's your nervous system. And you get to decide what happens in your visual system. You get to decide how your body lives. And for me, what I've experienced is like in so much of the beginning part of my journey was really about learning the tools to regulate my nervous system, understanding the emotional experience, getting myself super balanced. And in that, that was a heavy load to take on there for a couple of years to put my focus into. And now I have a heavy focus into like the physical part of my body and a goal every day that I push for my internal state to match the physical state of my body so that I want my body to match how I feel inside. And so getting back to belief systems, you know, the now beliefs that I have, I'm worthy, I'm this big creator, my voice is worthy, and I'm valuable beyond measure. All these, right? I believe that. But I haven't believed it for long enough that my body has changed to because you are your brain, you are your subconscious mind. So your beliefs are all creating that back to the perception. So it'll be interesting, I think, when I know, okay, I've lived this belief system for so long that there is a reflection in my perception, even though I also understand that and what I'm saying is I can also train my body to do certain things, right? Like I like to go to the gym and I do those things. Yes, but I don't overdo it like I used to. So to get the body I want, I'm not at the Pilates studio 8 times this week and weight training 3 times and moving, punishing. I'm doing it super lightly and in a way that feels like I'm at a good pace with myself and I feel healthy about it.
Honoring capacity and finding joy in some of that movement. And yeah, it's just all super, super different about where the intention is coming from and also having the ability to listen to the signals. I think for us, a lot of this journey began really with our food freedom program. And, binge eating was the output that led us to start to explore this at a very deep level and pull up some of these patterns emotionally, belief wise, and regulation. And so if people are hearing themselves in this conversation, you can join us on the site, on the brain based wellness site for 2 free weeks of nervous system training and start to learn these tools at rewiretrial.com. Jennifer and I are on there live and we love to work with people, but you could also check out the Food Freedom Program if you're someone who likes to self-study and wants to take a deep dive into this specific issue. There's a lot of really good content there that is specifically targeted toward restoring the relationship with the body, food, and movement.
It's a really incredible program. And I feel like over the decades, I've done just about everything to heal my food narratives. And right now there's some very popular diet pills out there. Well, I think they're really for
Mm,
diabetes or something. There's some alternatives out there. And I will tell you that the way that we are encouraging you to go will not be the fast route and it will not be easy, which is why we are there on site with you. That is why we are in the containers with you and why we have such great practitioners to facilitate with brain-based wellness. Like Food Freedom was a huge program and it really did change and shape the way that I view food. And I know that now because of where I'm at in my food journey with my body.
yeah, me too. So I would love to see all of you there in any capacity on the site, rewiretrial.com, or check out Food Freedom.
Yeah. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you guys. If you're a coach, a therapist, or a practitioner, you may know that you don't want to go back and revisit trauma over and over and over again in the name of healing. You see that going there doesn't always actually help your clients move past it. And maybe you feel what it does to your own nervous system. You experience the burnout that it creates, too much stress for too long. And you know that it's just not as simple as saying it's in the past, let it go, because the body is holding it. And so the past continues to shape the present in reactions, in outputs that we experience, and in responses. Trauma resolution is more than talking about the past and deeper than cognitively deciding to move forward. Trauma lives in the now, in the body and the nervous system, and affects the present moment until we find a way to rehabilitate the system. If you want to learn more about how to do that, get some practical, actionable tools and a framework, we are now enrolling in the next cohort of neurosomatic intelligence certification. You can go to neurosomaticintelligence.com to learn more. The link is in the show notes.